remember to buy a copy of your favorite books from the Cheeky Merchants. If we don't have it, we'll source it for you, but we'll definitely find the book for you.
Good evening, Cheeky Natives. How do you do? Little Khumalo, we're glad that you're back from the land of the free in time for this podcast.
Hey, Dr. Slay, the land of the free has left me a little bit loopy, but I think this is also a really wonderful time. It seems like we are in alignment these days with how we record our podcasts, right? So today we're recording a podcast with our guest, who Elma will introduce us to, but also what's happening is it's the Independence Day of Zimbabwe. So you will know in a moment why that is special. Dr. Slay, it's time for your guest introduction.
Sure, thank you so much. So I have the honor of introducing Busisekile Khumalo, who is a best-selling South African author who has written 8 books, including the popular The Harvard Wife series, Her Silent Screams, Fallen Candle, and No Maswazi. She's chosen to pursue her love for books over her learned profession in law. When she's not sharing hilarious escapades of her daughter and husband on Facebook, she's reading all kinds of titles that are suggested on spicy book talk. Busisekile currently resides in Johannesburg. Sunshine and Shadows is the first book in her latest series. Welcome, Busisekile.
Thank you for that wonderful welcome.
Busisekile, I suppose the first question really is, why are you into writing series? And I suppose the first question I have is, tell us more about the kind of decision to know from the very beginning of a book that this will be a series.
Okay, so most of it hinges off my endings, which I think are perfect. So a lot of my endings are cliffhangers, open-ended, and leave people wanting to know more. So then I'm often pushed into a corner of, okay, what happens next? And then it turns into a series. But if it were up to me, you could just dream the ending. But yeah. But I also enjoy reading series, so maybe there's that as well.
Now that you're speaking about endings, it's interesting. We had a question on how you use cliffhangers as a literary device, right? So, yes, you've spoken about writing series, but lots of people write series and I guess wrap it up in almost every book, and every book is like a different installment. You use a lot of cliffhangers. You leave the reader wanting more, right? Why do you choose those literary devices? Why cliffhangers, unsolved endings? Why that? Why do you want to leave your reader with so many questions?
I think for me, I love open-ended endings, but then I often feel it's unfair to the reader to just say, okay, then think about what happens next. I have written the Harvard series, that is, each book was concluded and then we move to the next and it's concluded and then we move to the next. But with Her Silent Screams and now with Sunshine and Shadows, they do end in cliffhangers. And it sort of hooks people in as well to say, okay, what happens next? What happens? But also I feel like I write too much. So the story could go on and on, and then I'm like, hey, I've written 90,000 words now. This is too much. I have to stop it here. At times it's accidental. At times it's intentional. Yeah.
Another question is, when you wrote the Harvard series, your first book, even the Harvard Wife series, as well as the No Maswazi, were self-published. And now Sunshine and Shadows is not self-published, but it's published through a publisher. And we wanted to speak a little bit about your experience of, one, making the decision about self-publishing and why you had made that decision then and how you came about to decide you wanted to self-publish, but then subsequently why you moved from self-publishing to what we call traditional publishing.
So initially when I didn't study writing or publishing per se, so I didn't know what to do. And so when I had the Harvard Wife manuscript, I didn't know where to go from there. Opened blogs and I did research on publishing houses and their submission guidelines. And I saw that they wanted me to send the whole manuscript to them first. I had trust issues. I had serious trust issues because I thought, what if they publish my work and don't acknowledge me? What if copyright infringement and all that stuff? But now I know that's the standard procedure for all publishing houses. But back then I wasn't sure because I'd never had someone say, okay, this is how it's done, this is how it goes. Then I had people who read my work and were like, no, you can self-publish. We know other authors who've done this, Abo Dudu, Abo Busisiwe, Precious Khumalo. The people I reached out to first were self-published authors. And then that's how I ended up self-publishing 8 books. I noticed that there are some things that I will never be able to do as a self-published author. I couldn't be eligible for some awards if I didn't have a publisher backing me up. And I wouldn't be able to get into other platforms like book festivals, book fairs, even though I did attend some as a self-published author. Like last year, I attended Kingsmeet. They invited me. I was still self-published then. But if you want to get into other major book festivals, you have to have the backing of a publisher to say, okay, what happens when I now want to resign from being an author or writing? What's the next step? Would I want to open a publishing house? Maybe I might. And if I want to open one, I have to work with one and get a feel of, okay, this is what they do. This is how I can't really say I've moved fully to traditional publishing because I only did a contract for 2 books.
I guess it's important to say the move is that now, at least for these 2 books, you're not self-published, right? But I suppose a related question to that is, what do you think your experience has been now having been self-published and published 8 books, but now having Sunshine and Shadows and then the next installation of the series? What do you think are the distinct kind of differences that you've seen or the skills that you are taking away from this process of having now traditional forms of publishing versus self-published?
I think one of the major differences is the resources, because I don't have to fork out any money. While with the other books, I had to pay from pocket for everything, from editing to getting a proofreader to getting a typesetting to everything. It was on me. And now I can delegate some of the things. But I've also realized that there isn't that much of a difference in terms of the work that you put in as an author. Because as a self-published author, I would work with the editor and the editor would send back the manuscript to me and I choose which changes I want to accept or not accept. That's the same role that a publisher plays. They won't force you to say, this or the highway, this or so it's similar in that way. And maybe there's some differences where they know the market better and they're like, no, this won't work, this will work. And I'm like, okay, let's try this. But one thing I've realized is because maybe I had that experience as a self-published author, they respect my voice more. When I say no, I know my readers. This is what my readers want. I feel like I wouldn't have had that power or could have taken that stance had I initially started via the traditional publishing route from the beginning. But when it comes to marketing as well, I feel like it's still the same. I do the bulk of the work because the publisher has so many other books on their catalog. So maybe they're going to market my book when it's just coming out. But essentially, I still do the bulk of the work. So I think the difference is the resources and the networks. And so if you as a self-published author can form those networks as well, you could also be in the same standing as someone in a traditionally published route.
I want to get into the book now because, wow,
And I suppose the introduction maybe didn't do justice to this, but this book is set in Zimbabwe, which is an interesting location, right? Zimbabwe is a neighboring country, but we don't interact often with contemporary literature in that way from Zimbabwe. We have university as the initial setting, and then we have transitions to work and life. And we see our characters interact with growing up, but in very visceral ways, right? Because you see them at university, you see them at work, you see them in life. And I'm curious about the role of geography in this book. You've lived in South Africa for an extended period. You could have set the book in South Africa. You made a very particular editorial choice to set the book in Zimbabwe, right?
Yeah.
So that's the first question, is around the setting of the book in Zimbabwe, but also then around choosing these geographic locations as a proxy for your characters just moving through life, right? All of their transitions take place in particular locations.
So I think I grew up in Zimbabwe. I was born and raised in Zimbabwe. And growing up, one of the things that my parents, especially my mother, always say, because I was very opinionated from when I was a child. My mother would say, you can see things, but don't talk about them. So there was that fear. And I remember when I was in Form 5, Form 6, I wanted to study divinity. My mother was like, no, don't even go there, because she was afraid I would end up not going to church. Well, joke's on you, Ma. I don't go to church now. But anyway, it was that because I was always that kind of a character. I was always very verbal about any injustice that I see happening or anything that is wrong that is happening. I always was one to speak out. And there was that fear to say, you're going to disappear or this is going to happen. And when I got into varsity, I wanted to study politics, and I was also again gently dissuaded to say, rather study law, rather do this, rather do that, because we don't want you to disappear. So it was that constant. So when I started writing, when I wrote The Harvard Wife, I wrote about South Africa because it felt safe at the time. It felt safe, and it didn't make me question myself or where I come from. And it was me distancing myself. And as I continued writing about more countries in Africa, I've written about Swaziland in Noma Swazi. I've written about Nigeria and Somalia in Her Silent Screams. So I've written about all those countries. When I wrote Fallen Candle, it was also set in Zimbabwe, but it was more of nostalgic about what happened, how Zimbabwe fell. So it's Fallen Candles, that sort of a thing. But now with Sunshine and Shadows, it was a brave move on my part, because I was going against everything that I was taught growing up to say, see these things, but don't talk about them. But we need to talk about them, because if we don't talk about them, then it's like we are erasing our presence, and in future generations, they won't understand why the country went through what it went through. That's why I moved it to Zimbabwe, and to say, okay. And the different transactions are showing the different socioeconomic standing of Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is not a uniform country. With South Africa, we know that Pretoria is the capital city, but it's almost the same as Johannesburg. So it's almost at par. There's a resemblance between the two. But when we go to Zimbabwe, Harare is the capital city. Yeah, I feel like it is unfair that in 2024, we still are losing people to abortion. It's really something that should be considered a right, a human right, to choose if I want to carry this. It then goes to autonomy. What happens with my body? Why am I being sanctioned about things that happen to my body? Things that are of consequence to me and my life and my future. And also the fact that it also puts women, and especially young girls or young women, in a point where they're very vulnerable, because they are vulnerable because now they make mistakes. You do this and you don't want to have that burden following you the rest of your life. And the fact that when it comes to child rearing or giving birth and everything, it all falls on a woman. So as much as we can argue about the right of the father, but the person whose life is most altered by a pregnancy is the woman, right? And for us in 2024, subjugate women, yes. It's a form of subjugation as well, because it's you can do this and this, but you can't do that with your body. And it puts women in a very vulnerable state. And so I wanted to shine light on that. Criminalizing abortion doesn't mean it's not happening. It is happening, but it's happening in unsafe conditions that leave women vulnerable, that lead them to death, or some of them lose their wombs, or even worse. So I think it was my way of shining light to some of there are a lot of human rights violations in Zimbabwe. And I think I shine a light on some of them in the book.
So, I suppose you wanted to say it's your form of activism, right?
Or
Yes,
protest, yeah.
activism. Thank you.
My question is around, and I think it ties in nicely with what we've just spoken about. Often I think about how women are particularly vulnerable in times of economic hardship, right? Because often they're the ones, particularly Black women, who can't participate economically, and as a result, there is a particular kind of vulnerability in the face of hardship. And the women in this book are the most vulnerable. They're university students. Vimbai is orphaned for all intents and purposes. There's a particular statement that you make about how women are forced to participate economically in the face of hardship and the difficult decisions that they have to make. And I thought it would be interesting for us to speak about how you wrote about that, but not from a place of judgment.
Yes, I feel like maybe I remember I had a friend who was in the Nosihle. Because looking back now, we then had a falling out because of that whole thing. Of course, I was right in what I said at that time, or the way I assessed the relationship that they had. But it was coming from a youthful point and a point of, I'd never do that. But now, having grown up and having seen the world and having seen what they were actually victims, those women are victims. Because I remember when we started university, first year, we were called fresh meat. And every Friday, there's men with big cars, small cars, but there's old men, some with wedding bands, some with not. They would prowl. And now that I'm older, I can see it for what it was. But back then, it was just every Friday up to Sunday, you see these cars around campus. And because now that I'm older, I see that they were actually predators. And they saw those young girls, those vulnerable students, as easy pickings. They know as a varsity student, you only have so much money. And there's things that you want to do or things that you're seeing around you. And a lot of us actually were coming from boarding school. So we're very sheltered. And then now you're thrust into the varsity life. And there are these predators. And no one protects you because apparently everyone is an adult in university. And I saw these things happening to my friends. And back then, I used to judge them. I judged them and I thought they should know better. They should. And now that I'm older, I feel like, no, they were victims. And I should have maybe been kinder to them. But so now I can be kinder to these girls in this book as an atonement to the judgment that I passed to my friends. At that time, I shouldn't have judged. I should have understood.
It's interesting that you speak about that. I think one of the other beautiful things that I think you do in the book is, for me, and I think also for Alma, is the way in which you write about sex, right? I think that particularly in societies, African societies, we know that sex is in the male domain. It is a people who are men and who particularly are people who identifies as cisgender men, sex is for them, right? And for nobody else. So in many
Yeah.
instances, they take sex. What you do really beautifully in the book is that you take the power of sex away from that domain, right? And you put it in the domain of women, because you write about sex in such a way that it is the woman who often initiates sex. It is the woman who often dictates the conditions of sex, right? So in many ways, it feels like freedom dreaming, right? Because we know that in reality, in most society, women are not takers of sex, wanters of sex, enjoyers of sex, right? This decision for you to write sex the way you did, but to put it in the domain of people who ordinarily, in ordinary life, and even in some writings, it's not within their domain, particularly in a society as Africanized and as African as Zimbabwe. Why it was important for you to make the decision to write about sex in that way.
We're taking a short break. We're taking a short break.
That's why you find Tafadzwa, he passes judgment on him. But realistically speaking, if you look at their body counts, he probably has a bigger body count. But every chance he gets, he uses that to shame her and make her shrink into herself, to say, okay, you're a slut, you slept your way through this and that and this. And Vimbai doesn't take it. She doesn't allow that. And I want women to be that way, to say, okay, own it, own your sexuality. You enjoy sex, own it. If you're not enjoying it, speak out. And remove sex from the realm of male ego. Sex is not about male ego. If he's not doing it for you, and a lot of women, when we talk about those things, especially via social media, you then realize that a lot of women actually have never experienced orgasms. And that's sad. It's really sad, because I try and paint a picture whereby women have to know that sex is not something that is done to you. Sex is not something that demeans or devalues you as a woman. It is a physical act that either leads to reproduction or enjoyment for you, not just the man. Sex is for you, about you, and yeah.
Oh, my girl Vimbai really goes through it all. Eh? I think this is why I was just like, we're gonna fight today, because what you put Vimbai through, no, my sister. Vimbai has all this childhood trauma, and I think we're starting to see the fact that so much of our childhood trauma manifests in our adult relationship with work and achievements and other relational issues. Vimbai has a very interesting relationship with overachievement, detachment, and just how she relates to other people. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about why you made the connection in her character between the very particular kind of childhood trauma that she experiences and then being this overachiever who always has it together, who makes hard decisions but is also seen to be very calculating in ways that just deny her of like humanity.
Because I feel like mental health, especially to Africans, is something that is taboo, but also we associate it with someone who is devolving into a breakdown, having a mental breakdown, either you're crazy or whatever. But a lot of times we are walking mental illness incubators. And especially those who are achievers. And unless you stop and question why you are the way you are, a lot of times you just go through life without knowing that you actually have you are an undiagnosed mental health incubator. I don't want the face of mental health to be someone who's always weak or suicidal, because That's not it. Now we talk about mental health, but I feel like we talk about it from a place of scorning the person. I remember recently on Twitter, I saw someone posted Ricky Rick's family. And most of the comments were like, yo, he was weak, he was a coward, he was this and that. And so that's why when I paint these characters, I want to give them what is considered strength, but also show that in that strength, they can lie a brokenness. Underneath that functionality, there is a brokenness that we carry each with around us. And to also have people reading to question themselves and dig deep to say, okay, but I also hear those voices, or I also have all of this unresolved trauma. What am I doing to heal it? What am I doing to heal myself? And once those questions start, and also to have them feel compassion for this girl that they see as this high achieving girl, but to also have compassion, I feel like that will also translate to the compassion that they might extend to themselves. Because when it comes to mental health, you require certain kindness to actually dig deep and say, okay, I'm not fine, I'm hurting, or my inner child is hurting. And so I just want people, when they're reading it, to have that at the back of their minds, that mental health is not always someone who wants to commit suicide. Mental health is not always someone who doesn't wake up and bath, or depression or whatever. There's so many things that we don't talk about. There's so much trauma that we carry, and to be kind to ourselves and to others.
Vimbai has my heart. But Emma's right. When you put Vimbai through a lot, but so
I feel like you're gonna hate me more in Rubies and Rain, but anyway, yeah.
I wanted to speak a little bit about what Vimbai kind of. No, I suppose a number of the girls in this book, you touch on another kind of conversation about transactional sex, right? And we see how it's weaponized, because Tafato kind of weaponizes it to be like, oh my gosh, I thought we were just sleeping with these people so that you can get groceries and all of that. But look at what's happening now. Now you want to sleep your way to the top and all of that. But I wanted to speak a little bit about transactional relationships, right? And in the context of particularly these men were often coming to universities and they were essentially waiting and preying on these women, right? I wanted to speak about why it was important for you to write about transactional relationships. I don't necessarily want to call it sex work, because I don't think that these girls made the decision to participate in sex work, right? So it wasn't vocational in a way, but they definitely did know that they were participating in transactional relationships. We have sex, you buy me something. We have sex, I have groceries. But I think that the context of having sex in an unequal power relations is also important. And I wanted us to explore a little bit about that.
Yeah. In an economy such as Zimbabwe, you find that women then offer the one thing that they have, which is sex. You find that someone might say, you want a job? Okay, come to my office. We will discuss it. And usually the discussion is them wanting to get into your pants. And so Vimbai knows this, and she preempts it. She's like, no, you're not going to use me. I'm going to use you. She's preempted. And then we have Unosihle, who's also part of it, but for her, because she's a good girl, she doesn't want to label it as transactional. So she sugarcoats it as, oh, I love him, he loves me. And then we have people like Ruby, who's exploring her sexuality. And yeah, so in a country like Zimbabwe, which is riddled with economic hardships, we find that it makes women vulnerable when it comes to sex, where they don't have sex because they want to at times, but because they need to get groceries, or they need to get a job, or they need to be kept. And so there's that transaction, and whether it's really a fair transaction at the end of the day.
I think that's actually such an important question. It's about fairness, and I think about the relationships in Vimbai's life. It always feels like she's in some sort of unequal relationship. So I think about, I'm contrasting Tafadza and Ian. Tafadza, Tafadza has an idea of who he wants Vimbai to be, and in the picture, Tafadza Vimbai has always denied her humanity. So she's always going to be somebody that he rescues. He comes in from a position of power and privilege, and he gets to choose her even though she's seemingly unworthy, right? Ian forces her into a relationship with him through all these threats and the like. So it doesn't begin on equal footing at either turn. And I think it would be interesting for us to compare the two relationships because on paper they seem different, right? But when you start to think about how they begin, but also the positions that Vimbai finds herself in terms of negotiation and power, they're very similar. And I wanted us to speak a little bit about why you wrote her relationships with these romantic partners in the way that you did, right? Because it's hard to see the romance, guys. Ian is a monster. Tafadzwa is a spoiled brat.
Before you answer that, it's interesting to think about, right? And Tafata, for instance, have this romantic escapade. But when you think about it, like when you take out all the fluff, right? It just feels like these romantic relationships were not romantic at all.
Tafata is a boy. Let me just put it like that. Tafata is a boy who has this one good thing that he finds, and he messes around thinking that that one thing is still gonna be there when he grows up. And now he wants to play around, but he wants that thing to remain stationary. It must remain there where he left it. And no one must play with his toy until he comes back. And so now when the thing or the toy actually chooses to go to others and also experience what he's also experiencing, he throws tantrums. And that's why I'm saying he's a boy. Then, and Ian is a dictator. Because Ian could have gotten Vimbai, because in the beginning, he was there, she was single and ready to mingle, and he shot her down and then comes in as this. For me, Ian is the anti-hero. So I love anti-heroes. So I might be a bit biased when it comes to Ian. But yes, their relationship is not on a fair footing in terms of economically, in terms of the threats, in terms of the age difference as well. But I feel like what Ian has going for him is that he sees Vimbai, but he doesn't hold what he sees against her. He imagine knowing that this girl slept with your son-in-law and still, okay, I still want you, I don't care. And he could easily have used that like against her. Or there's no point in the book where even when threatening her, there's no point where Ian uses Vimbai's autonomy against her. I think that's the one difference between the two relationships is that he sees her at her worst and he doesn't use it against her. But Utafato, when he's slighted, especially that court scene. Yeah. I know you
No,
like Tafato. I know you like.
no, it's not even about liking Tafata, right? But we need to be honest about the way in which you made an assertion now about Ian not using Vimbai's autonomy against her. But I think he does. The very purpose of how their relationship starts is him using that autonomy, right? Ian didn't make the decision for Vimbai to be with him, right? He just was like, shoops, come. And then only at the end, right? And I don't even, you know what? Only at the end, he's actually, this is why we're here. So it wasn't that I'm attracted to you. It wasn't
Yeah.
that this has happened. It was that you witnessed something that you were not supposed to witness. And because you witnessed that particular thing, your life is in danger. I'm not bringing you into confidence at that point. I'm only going to bring you into confidence at the other point. And for me, I feel like I don't think I like Tafatswa. I think I like the ideals that Tafatswa in his boyishness, right? Because Tafatswa does admit that he may have everything he has, but ultimately companionship is important. And we see a number of people in this book come to that realization. So even for Ian, it may have started with Vimbai, it may have started with a control thing and trying to save her, but ultimately you see them develop a relationship, right? Where it was also important for them to come to the realization that they need companionship. I agree with Alma. These men did not deserve Vimbai, right?
Vimbai, yeah.
Because of the way in which they interact with her and began to have relations.
They just
On
trash
the,
him.
on the one hand, Tafatswa is a boy who says, okay, I'm going to do whatever I need to do, but you're going to be back because you got my back. On the other hand, you need to go to therapy, you need to do all of these things before. In both of them, Vimbai has to play a particular role in order to be loved, right? So Vimbai can't really be. We can accept that Vimbai can be slightly herself in one relationship than the other. But in both these relationships, Vimbai is not given the opportunity to be her full self. And actually, they are both trash. Trash!
That's just horrible. They really both.
Yes. But also, I feel like I don't want to defend Ian, but as I've already said my bias, I've already said my bias.
I think that's why we said we are ready to fight. Defend Ian.
Not Ian. She enters a relationship through threats. Like, how can I get you to love me? And I think it also opens an important conversation around coercion because we're starting to think about just even how people relate. So if I do something with you because I feel unsafe if I don't do that thing, I have not consented, right? You've coerced me. And the thing about coercion as a spectrum, but if I enter a relationship with you because you're significantly older, you are intrigued by the fact that you can trap me and steal my freedom. That is not you just being intrigued by me as a person, right? It's the idea that often men meet women who intrigue them, women who are independent, who are powerful, who have all of these characteristics that inspire a little bit of spite in them. So I want to trap you and make you this caged bird version of yourself because that does something for my ego. And that isn't love. That's not romance. Ian is just, he's on the spectrum of just problematic. Tough as They're just two sides of a coin. Trashy, trashy, trashy. I'm not sad about what happens to him in the book.
No, I hear you totally. But I feel like if Ian had been honest with Vimbai from the get-go about everything that, okay, this is what is happening, the way Vimbai was set up at that point, she would have gone running to Tafatswa. And him being the loudmouth that he is, she would have died. She was at that point whereby, but he could have just done something else besides then coercing her into a relationship, which was wrong. But I feel like him actually being honest and open with Vimbai in the beginning wouldn't have worked. But I don't know how he could have done it better. But yes, he could have started better. But him telling her the truth, she was a bit delulu. So
well, there's a thing about like grooming and what that does for your psyche. So by the time that she got there, I just wonder if she was in the mental space. Vimbai is really vulnerable. Vimbai, has grown up practically as an orphan, right? Vimbai has always had to fight for particular acceptance. Vimbai is growing up in Zimbabwe at a time where economic hardship is at its peak, right? So you know the kind of transactional things that she has to do in order to just survive. Ian also knows that. Like, why are you at parties with young girls? Like, what's going on? What could be inspiring you to party with university students? I am judging the men in this book, Shane. There is no redemption for these men. I want to talk about her father. There is no perfection, particularly in this brand of male species. But on a serious note, Ubaba Vimbai he has very deep failings as a father, right? He
Yeah.
is also Vimbai's only remaining parent. And there is an attempt to humanize him in the book. So we see why he is the way that he is, why he allows his stepmother to treat her the way that she does. But it begs the question, how far do we extend grace in those kind of
Mm.
relationships? So, what is your personal responsibility as a parent, and what is the grace that your children owe you in the mistakes that you make?
I think also connected to that, right? To think about Ian as a father, right? So the way that Ian treats Ruby is also a space for us to begin to think about extension of grace. So is the grace really in the way in which these men treat their daughters?
At times, I often don't think about those things until I go to book reviews and I'm like, oh, you're right, you're right. But like on Sunday, I went to a book review of Sunshine and Shadows with Kopano Odyssey Book Club. And then they made me realize that Baba Vimbai was also acting from a point of guilt. Vimbai's Mainini very dirty. Imagine promising this one and then tomorrow you wake up with that. So he knew exactly what he did to make her that bitter. And so his guilt made him accept where he's wrong is that he didn't protect Vimbai. He could have manned up and taken whatever that woman wanted to dish out, but he shouldn't have let it extend to his daughter, who was innocent in the whole mess. So there's that. But also, I feel like if you look at Vimbai, the way she describes her father when her mother was alive and her father after her mother died, it's so also like cognizant of what Zimbabwe does to men. If you look at Vimbai's father and Ian, they're almost the same age, right? They're almost the same age. Literally, they're almost the same age. But Ian is buff, he's youngish, he looks, because he's got money. Vimbai's father has got stooped shoulders. He's so grateful when his daughter buys something for him. So at times, I wanted to show what poverty can do to a man as well. That it can shrink your manhood.
But this is, why must we fight? Also feel that Vimbai's father is trashy. And trashy, yes, in a sense that he didn't protect her and he just makes her like this woman is running a Rosie around her and calling her all sorts of names to be, oh, you just like your mother was also this, your mother was also that. But when Vimbai works, there's ultimately this sudden forgetfulness that Vimbai must have, ne? And there's this grace that Vimbai must extend to the father and bring the food and all of that. And I want to speak about that, that oftentimes people who are supposed to protect us hurt us so deeply and so much continuously. But when the situation is turned, we must be able to be forgetful and forgive and show up for those people. Because that's what Vimbai ultimately has to do, right? She has to realize that, yes, these children, these siblings, they belong to some, it's not their fault, and therefore I must now step up. I want to talk about that. That's the grace that we are essentially forced into. It's not a grace that we extend ourselves.
Yeah.
We are forced into it.
And it's actually the tale of a lot of firstborn daughters. We have that thing whereby we have all this trauma from how we were raised. Maybe it was neglect. Maybe it was that fact where you had to fend for yourself from a very early age. And now that you're grown up and now that they're able to provide whatever, you're just supposed to automatically forget all the wrongs that were done to you. You forget the neglect, you forget the abuse, and now you have to step up and provide. And I feel like when we talk about parents, there's this African saying that your parent is your God on earth. So now parents are absolved from every evil thing that they do. Like I've often seen it on social media when someone complains of the way a parent treated them or the way a parent was not there. You often get told at the end of the day, they're still your father, they're still your mother, you must forgive to get blessings. So it's really something that is a pandemic in the African society. The fact that we don't make parents take accountability for their actions, especially against children. And it's like you must then, as you're rightfully saying, you must forgive and move on, because now you have to be reminded that these children are innocent, but they are not your responsibility. Like, she shouldn't be responsible for her siblings, even if she was raised right, even if their mother was not cruel to her. The duty of raising those siblings should not have had to fall on them. But because in African homes, when you're the one who's now gotten to a better place, now you must carry everyone else at home. And it's problematic. It is.
Yes, I don't even know. But it just makes you think hard about that, what the response, because we often think we've made an interesting point about what people think is the responsibility to our parents, but what we don't speak about often is what the parental responsibility to the child is, and where you have failed. But how do you account, or how do you ask for grace? And that's not a conversation that people are comfortable with, right? Because
No.
even her father doesn't really ask for forgiveness or for grace. There's almost like, this is what happened, let's heal, like the Klaknon is saying, and let's move on. But you've spoken a little bit about this woman that has so many multiple contrarian views. She's born again, but she's in a relationship with a married person. She wants to have children, but she has an illegal abortion. And there's the question around infertility in her personal context. But also, she is so vastly different in many ways to what she deviates a lot from her core beliefs, or we don't know if those are her core beliefs or if they're mutable. And I'm interested about what it means to write an imperfect woman who still has to find other women in a place of grace, because her and Vimbai have to hold each other in grace, right?
Yeah. Uh, with Nosihle, I feel like also it's a point of growth, right? In the beginning, because she's coming from a place of, she feels she's better than Vimbai because hers is a love story. So at times we then sugarcoat our things and like, oh, but no, I fell in love. He's going to divorce his woman. He's going to. So it's that delusion that is there. But Vimbai, when she sleeps with this man, she knows exactly what she's doing. Like with the doctor, she knew that the doctor was doing it because his wife was in Australia or wherever she was, and they were going through, and he needed companionship, and Vimba was able to provide that for him, but it didn't mean anything more, right? Unosihle, she also comes across a lot of things that Nosihle, I like that you're saying core beliefs, because what really is it that she believes and what has she been told is good? That can be two separate things, you know? So it comes from, there's religious people and then there's spiritual people, which is two different things. You can be super religious, but not be moral, right? She goes to church, she does this and that, but the way she passes judgment onto Vimbai in and of itself is not holy. And then she goes on to sleep with a married man, but she covers up with the fact that no, but I go to church, I'm a good girl, I haven't done anything bad. Religion is another tool that is used against women, but I feel like a lot of women don't see it until it's a bit too late. And so also the things around surrounding her decision to have the abortion were about what are people going to say, abantu bazothini, because she is providing this facet of being a church girl, And now she comes back from school pregnant and unwed. That is not the image that she has cultivated with people. So now she must get rid of this mistake. The irony is that she was judging Vimbai for having an abortion and spreading that, when in actual fact Vimbai didn't have an abortion and she was the one who had an abortion. One thing about my characters is that none of them are perfect.
I'm messy. I'm messy. But I think what you do is you also begin to hold space for female friendships. We know that they are problematic, they are messy, but we see between Nosihle and Vimbai that there's also a space to hold each other deeply and to have regard for each other. So even in the midst of Nosihle doing the most for Vimbai and also going with Maria, and we deserve a something. Maria, like, you can see that those are not true friends. You've taken someone to a place that you've been to. Some complications happen as a result. Instead of you saying, I'm going to do something, you run away, right? And then you actually never come back to apologize and say, hey, I'm really sorry that like you almost lost your life and it was because of me. But I do think that there is a way in which Vimbai and Nosihle's relationship kind of molds and changes, right? It seems they seem to meet each other where they're at, right? Even post university, they seem to really cultivate a relationship. Unfortunately for Nosihle, she seems to just find wrong men, right? But Vimbai meets her where she's at, right? At the different places in her life. And I wanted to speak about the power of authentic friendships, and particularly the friendship between Nosihle and Vimbai.
Yeah, I feel like there's this narrative that women hate, the fact that all friendships either backstabbing each other. But like you rightfully said, female friendships can be messy, but also are very special in the fact that no one can hold space for you like a fellow Black woman. And I can attest to this because Black women have carried me on their backs, like throughout my career as an author, my transitions into motherhood, becoming a wife. And I wouldn't be the woman I am today without some of the friendships that I've cultivated online and as well as in real life. And so for me, it's very important when we look at these women, their friendship is not perfect. Nothing is perfect in life, but the love is there. And at times, under love, we can get a little jealous at times. It's normal. You can get jealous of someone, but now when you come from a place of saying, "Okay, I was jealous of you. This is why I acted this and way," and we take accountability for saying, "Okay, I was wrong, and this is what happened. I'm sorry," and apologizing, and then those friendships evolve, and it cements who you become as a person. I feel like both of them became better people because of each other. And even though in the end, Vimbai now resents Nosihle, because Nosihle, rightfully so, wants to know what happened between her and Tafazo, because there were a couple goals. And all of a sudden, it just ended. And Nosihle wants to know. And Vimbai is resentful because Nosihle is part of the reason why she and Tafazo didn't work out, but she couldn't say so.
I'm sorry, I have to defend Nosihle. I have
Please.
to defend Nosihle.
Masong.
Tafatswa is the reason why Tafatswa and Vimbai are not together. Everyone is ancillary, but Tafatswa, that little boy, it is him. That little boy, it's him.
But here's the thing. If that abortion hadn't happened, ne? And Ian would have had less to hold against Vimbai. So literally he was holding that against her. Their relationship could have ended. Eventually it would have ended. Eventually, I feel like eventually it would have, because he would have shown his ass at some point. But what do you call this? When there are causations, there's bigger causations and smaller ones. The trigger was no thief.
Now I'm just like, Tafatwa is the problem. Tafatwa and his family. Wait,
Yo,
when hold up.
guys.
I just have one question. Did Tafatwa know that his father has a whole other family and that those people were his siblings and not his cousins? I want you to tell me straight.
But it says Fadza is
knows.
trash as hell.
Read what I read. I just want to be sure.
Confirm. Usita Fadza is
He
premium.
knows.
What
He
the
knows.
fuck? Tafatwa
The thing
deserves
is,
everything.
no, I feel like in that instance, I feel like the father demonizes the mother to Tafatwa. Because even the way Tafatwa talked about his mother, and when Vimbai meets her, she's expecting one thing from what Tafatwa is saying. And then we discover, Haibo, this woman has an MBA. This woman has businesses.
This is my body. This is my womb. I've had one child. That one child is enough, right? And again, it's speaking about just the crappiness of these men, right? Like women are going to be incubators of families. And when she wants to do something else, instead of them talking about it, she makes her own decision. He just has another whole family. Tafatwa doesn't care about his mother. He goes there and has happy, hunky-dory family.
I want us to just chat a little bit about Ruby, right? Ruby,
Yeah.
Ruby is an interesting character. It's important for us to explore what it means to be queer in environments that are queerphobic, right? Ruby has this template of who her father expects her to be, and the reality is that Ruby cannot be openly queer, whether she wants to or not, right? She even has to seek refuge elsewhere because her father is trying to hook up. And I swear, Ian knows that his daughter is not interested in this person. But there's a way in which he's trying to mold her to be something that she's not. So I wanted to talk about Ruby as a character because it's sad in many ways, but it's also a true reflection of how many queer people had to live particular lives because of the environments that they find themselves in.
Yeah.
And so interesting. I don't know if you did this intentionally, but ultimately the death of Ian maybe Ruby's freedom. And we know for many queer people in African societies, they literally often have to wait for their parents to no longer be on earth for them to live because they are not able to invite their parents in. Because as Alma said, it's very queerphobic environments. And particularly when it's your family, it's even harder.
Yeah. But the first thing that you have to recognize before we come to ENS per se is that homosexuality is actually still illegal in Zimbabwe. Even now, it's illegal. It's not allowed. A lot of what Ruby had was, I think it was not from her father direct, but it was from the former president. And the father just never happened to contradict it. And so for her, it was that fear of saying, okay, this is how this man thinks. So if I were to come out to him, I probably disgust him. Because if he's agreeing with someone who's saying being gay is worse than pig, or I've forgotten the direct quote, but it's there in the book. And it was actually taken from a speech of a president.
He actually said it, yes.
Yes, he said it, like, those were the words. And it goes to a point whereby it's not even just about family, but it's something you hide so that you're not arrested, something you hide so that you're not attacked, something you hide because it's so unfair. It's so unfair because then now we're not really sure if Ruby would have even liked Cheropa, if she would have actually wanted to be with a guy. Because
you can't say we're not even sure. We are very certain because she makes particular decision when she finds out that Vimbai is the one who kissed him at that particular thing. Or we know that more that's kissed. Even when they're flown to Dubai to get the car, whatever, you can see that she's not happy, right? When she recalls her encounters with the people she's been with, particularly her first love who leaves her, you can feel the authenticity, the kind of, the texture is so vivid. The interactions between her and her supposed future husband are flat, vapid.
I think she's bi-curious. Oh, sorry. I almost said something that
Yes.
happens in Rubies
Yes.
and Rain.
You must correct. You know the chicken preview. What?
Don't hold
Listen.
back, Busisekile. Ungasabi, girl.
There's a part in Rubies and Rain where Ruby actually says the best part of the relationship with what's his name was the sex. So I feel like she wasn't given room to explore her sexuality. And especially considering that she was at an all-female boarding school. And so she really didn't know what it is that she wanted, or she loves Tendero. But at the same time, it's like this. Also, she's also just like Tafadzwa, whereby a new toy comes and it's shiny and you're playing with it and you forget the person who was there. But honestly, imagine this. Ruby was busy making out with Chero, but in front of Tendero. She's trash for that as well. If we're calling people trash, Ruby was trash for the way she treated Tendero. And we really get into Ruby's story in Rubies and Rain, where we're now looking at her relationship with Tendero, her relationship with Cheropa, her relationship with her father, her mother, and yeah. And Ruby has a lot of growing up to do in Rubies and Rain. So yeah, that's all I can say.
Oh, yeah.
That's all I can say.
No, why she allowed? That's all I can say. But I want to talk about maternal relationships. This book, the maternal relationships in this book are so interesting. So we see Vimbai lose her mother very early on. Her stepmother, who also happens to be her aunt, is an absolute nightmare. Nosika's mother is very religious, and we almost feel like she's very judgmental, but she actually surprises us in how she approaches Nosika's situation, right? But there's also my school teacher who ends up being like a mother, I think Grace. And then there's Grace, right, who is a mom, but she's not overly maternal in the way that you think of a mother. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the maternal relationships in this book and why they're so closely linked to the grief and the loss that we see in the story.
I feel like a lot of times people say a girl's most important relationship is with her father because then she knows what to look for in a man. But I feel the most important relationship a daughter has is the one with her mother because then she gets to know what to look for in herself, which is much more important because you get to live with yourself for the rest of your life. You won't die on yourself. You can't cheat on yourself, that sort of a thing. So now that relationship, a maternal relationship, is very delicate because a lot of times as African women, we parent from a place of trauma, right? So it's that we are so hyper vigilant because of our trauma. So now we're very hyper vigilant when it comes to our daughters because we don't want them to go through what we went through, right? If Nosihle's mother had shared some of what happened to her, maybe at an earlier stage, Nosihle might not have felt the need to be perfect that much. And so her mother put that much pressure on her. She felt like she needed to be the perfect daughter for her mother. And she didn't understand where her mother was coming from. So, in a way, her situations helped their relationship, helped their bond, because then they were able to share their trauma and bond over that. And then when we look at Vimbai idolizes her mother, maybe because she lost her at a very young age. And in death, we never really think of the bad that people did. We often only remember the good and glorify it. And now, when she is introduced to this version of her mother by her aunt, this, oh, So really, am I really like my mother? Barbie, who never wanted to be a mother, really. She never wanted to be a mother. But then she's forced to be a mother. And the child that she gets, is very shitty to her. And now she gets Vimbai. And I feel like to her, Vimbai is not the daughter, because she didn't want kids. It's her sister, or sort of a younger version of her, that she doesn't want to go through what she went through. And she sees so much of herself in Vimbai, and she's a maternal figure as well to Vimbai. And then there's Ruby's mother, who we also see in an abstract light because she's also dead. And Ruby has also put her in a pedestal to say, okay, this is my mother, and no one can come and take my mother's place. And now we have Vimbai, this young girl who's almost her age, now is having to play that maternal role. And I don't think it's going to work out. But I always focus on mother-daughter relationships, because I feel like Africa is suffering from the mother wound, right? And even though we talk a lot about absent fathers, because absent fathers is a pandemic, but we don't talk enough about how toxic mothers are or can be, especially to their daughters. Mothers are saints when it comes to their sons. So there's a saying that mothers raise their daughters and they love their sons. I often explore that in all my books. You'll see there's always some thread in terms of mother daughters. That is because I feel like that is the most important relationship in a girl or in a woman's life. Because then it's either you're going to grow up exactly to be like your mother, or you're going to try so hard to be the opposite of your mother. And still, it all stems from a place of trauma and hurt.
As you can tell, we've obviously been fighting, but I think it's also testament to what makes a good book, right? Just like the kind of things that it makes the reader sit with. Now that Sunshine and Shadows is out in the world, right? And obviously it's no longer musings and characters in your head. After you've written it, what do you hope people who pick it up and read it, take away from the book?
I think the first thing that I want people to take away is to see Zimbabwe as a whole, not just what is only shown on the media, because media can be controlled at times. But I just wanted people to have a feeling of my home country, what it is in its entirety. To know that the rich are there in Zimbabwe. And a lot of times, I see it on social media, it's giving Zimbabwe. It's often used in a derogative manner, or at times it's banter. But I just hope when people read the book, it gives them a balanced view of what Zimbabwe is, the beautiful and the ugly, the sunshine and the shadows. And also, I want these conversations like the ones that we're having now to arise when we question motherhood, when we question autonomy, when we question abortion laws, where we question homophobia, where we question all of those things, because I feel like most of those things are uniform. And the fact that so many people could relate to Sunshine and Shadows, even though they are not from Zimbabwe, says a lot about how similar our situations are. Whether you're in South Africa, whether in Zimbabwe or Namibia, or as Africans, we go through almost the same things. And so I want to create that thread of understanding, where you understand where I'm coming from and I understand where you are coming from, and we can meet from a point of understanding. And also shut down the narrative of women hate women. I just want to give power to women, but also a space for them to be vulnerable. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Busisekile. I think you can tell that we really enjoyed this book. We may have fought you because of some of the things that you did to our homegirl, but we really enjoyed the book. We are so excited for the next book in this. I have faith in you, Busisekile. I know you're going to do the right things.
Can it be like lovely, happy ever after? Can we have fantasy? Awa.
But sometimes
I think it gets worse before it gets better, is all I can say. It gets worse, but it does get better. There's some happiness somewhere, somehow. I feel like they forged something from the rain. They forged something.
Thank you so much, Busisekile. We really enjoyed this book, and we hope to speak to you again soon when your next book is up. Cheekinators,
Yes.
again, thank you so much for always supporting us. We hope that you've enjoyed this conversation, and until next time, this is a goodbye.
Thank you so much. This was on my bucket list, Ronald. This was part of my bucket. So thank you. I'm so happy to be here and so happy to discuss Sunshine and Shadows. And I cannot wait for you to fight me over Rubies and Rain because I know you're going to fight. But I love that.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Cheeky Natives. Don't forget to subscribe, review, and rate the podcast on all your streaming platforms.